Well, it's time to look at a classic album. This is something that I've been wanting to do for a while now, and I just haven't really gotten around to it. I've done it a couple of times in my past, but I feel like I really should do a lot more of these. It drives up content, and hey, you guys love it. So let's talk about an album that I feel gets overlooked quite a bit. And Then There Were Three by Genesis. So, Genesis really shouldn't need too much of an introduction at this point, forefathers of progressive rock. The thing that I love about Genesis, and in particular this album, is their ability to craft very beautiful, melodic, and complex songs with this storytelling aspect. And that's something that I really, really love about this particular album. Now, the album title is a kind of a throwback to what actually was going on in the band. Steve Hackett left, which means that it's just Mike Rutherford, Tony Banks, and Phil Collins. Peter Gabriel has now been gone for 3 albums, so it's just the 3 boys. This kind of showcases a little bit of a transitional period for Genesis. Gone are the longer stretches of music, like the longest track on here is just over 7 minutes, but they still are able to maintain the complex, sophisticated styles of music with that storytelling aspect. But you can tell that they're starting to lean into the 80s synth pop that's going to be going on a little bit later on. And in my mind, this is Genesis's darkest album. And I don't mean dark in a doom, gloom, kind of a feel. I mean dark in a sense of like nighttime. The perfect metaphor that I have for this particular album is that it's a bunch of travelers coming together at a rest stop with a campfire, and they're sharing stories. Some of the stories are true, and some of the stories are made up and a metaphor for something bigger. And I just love that idea as I'm sitting down and I'm listening to this album. That is what I mean by it's dark. The overall surroundings of this album have that dark undertone, and there's a lot of shadows going on, but it's a splendid, it's a somber, it's a peaceful and like warm darkness. It's not a scary darkness, it's just a lack of light. Now, not all the songs on this particular album 100% work, and I do want to address that. It's probably one of the first albums that for me don't get like a 10 out of 10 or a 5 out of 5 rating. The one that in particular stands out is Many Too Many, and I feel like this is one of the songs that kind of sidestep that overall concept. It's a little bit of a B-side single of the album. Similarly, a little bit to Undertow. Now, the thing that elevates Undertow for me is that big sound that we have, this big synthesized symphony that's going on in the chorus work. That I particularly love, and it just gushes my heart when I hear that big bam sounding towards it. And this sound is also very similar to the sound that we have on Snowbound. The story of this one being the transitions between seasons, that innocence of the childhood that puts a personality into a snowman, and then when it comes into spring, and spring being that joyous rebirth, that rebirth still has a little bit of a death. And that death being the snowman that's melting away. And I feel like these 2 tracks of Undertow and Snowbound are blended together because it's the last day of the life of this melting snowman. So I kind of like how these 2 tracks are kind of interlinked in that sense. I also love the story of the track that's between these 2, of Ballad of Big. I love the story, I love the drive of this, I love how it's almost Western in feel. In that, you know, there's this cowboy that never backs down from a challenge, and he meets up with the big challenge that eventually takes his life, and his spirit is haunted and must continue to try to complete this unbeatable bet that he's had. And I really like that idea that it's this haunted ghost tale, but in this framework of this cowboy sense. And speaking of cowboys, another historical tale that's on this is Deep in the Motherlode, the first track off of the second side, where it's about prospecting, about the gold rush, and, you know, go west, my son, go make a name for yourself. I do feel like this track goes a little bit too long in reprising the chorus a number of times. I don't know if it really needed to reprise it that many times that it did, but it's still a really fun track to get up and going. And again, I feel like these 2 tracks of the Ballad of Big and Deep in the Motherlode, again, are very linked in being that, you know, talking about something of the old times. So some of the other tales that we have on here. I really enjoy Say It's Alright, Joe. This is a very somber track. It's very melodramatic. Like, you can almost see the old dive bar that the individual is in, the smoke wafting up from his cigarette as he's just leaning into the bartender and just pleading, say it's all right, and how this juxtaposes the actual bulk of the track, where it's a much more bombastic and lively track. I love that little duality that we have within that, and then it brings it right back to a very personal track. So along the campfire scene, this is much more of a reflection from the individual itself. And then, of course, this track that comes before it, The Scenes of a Night Stream, is talking about Old Nemo and Dreamland, an old comic strip from way back in the past. And so a lot of these tracks, you kind of are a little bit of a history as well. Like, there's not a whole lot of contemporary subject matter on this. A lot of it is like back in the past, and I love the sounds that we have. I love the sounds from Scenes from a Night Dream. I love the synthesizer that Tony is really utilizing on this, the soundscapes that he's providing in that. I love how big and fun it is, because it is a child's like dream. So these leave some of my favorite tracks that I purposely kind of left off onto the wings. The first track being Down and Out. I love how big this track is, and I love that off-kilter rhythm section that Phil Collins is utilizing on here. It's got a really fast and punchy beat that really kind of knocks your head around, and I love how big and large this track is, but the outro of this is very somber and very like intimate, and I feel like it bleeds into Undertow very, very well. So it provides such a big explosion of sound right at the beginning to kind of settle yourself back in. This also leads to The Lady Lies, the second last track of this album. I love this track. It's one of my favorites off of this, and one of my favorite stories. You know, it's got the hero, and he's going out on this big quest, and you have this villain, and when Phil does it live, he always does, you know, I want you to boo me, because there's a villain in this track, and he always does like this, about like the big mustached villain going on there, and whenever he does that, you have to boo him. But what I really like is that the villain is actually the man's desire, and that will be the thing that's his downfall. So I really like that whole bait and switch of like here's this guy, he wants to defeat the villain, and he goes to this maiden in the woods, but it's the maiden that eventually, you know, brings him to his own demise, because what's the last line? How can you escape what he desires? And like, it's that you will go to the ends of the earth to complete this quest, but that quest might actually be your downfall. But that play out, that explosive drum work from Phil, I keep being reminded why Phil Collins is my favorite drummer, or one of my favorite drummers of all time, because that Phil at the end, again, a little bit of a pun there for Phil and Phil, but that Phil in the end where he just explodes on the drums and the rhythm section just makes me melt. I'm just like, so good. Now this brings me to my favorite track of Burning Rope. And I don't know why, but in my mind, it feels like there's this masquerade ball that's going on. I know that's not what the song is about, but that's the image that I get in my head when I'm listening to this. And the thing that really sets this track for me is the bridge in the middle of this track. I love how it descends the scale in a minor, but then goes up the scale in a major. So there's this slight switch, and then once it reaches that pinnacle of the top of the scale, there's this big synthesized feel. And I love how all three band members are really giving it in that little piece there. Like, this is the most progressive track off the whole album, and that's probably why I like it so much, because it still shows that these guys are still firmly rooted in the progressive rock scene, even though in the 1978-77 that this was released, progressive rock really didn't know what it wanted to do. So I like the fact that this was square in a progressive rock scene. And then finally we get to the last track of Follow You, Follow Me, the single, the one that most people know from this. I particularly love this track. I know not a whole lot of people do, but I really love it. I love how intimate it is. I love how sincere this song is. This is probably one of the reasons why I didn't like a lot of Phil's other ballads up until this point. It didn't feel completely sincere, and I love how jovial this one is. It's Follow You, Follow Me. It's a big circle, and it's without getting too mushy, lovey goo goo. It is, the whole love is a big circle. I love what it's doing, and it's a positive feedback, and that at the end of the day is what this song is all about. And I just love how jovial and fun it is. So In the end, I love this album. I really do. I think it gets overlooked a little too much, even though it is a transitional album. It's, they're moving away from the traditional progressive rock, longer stretches of music, big soundscapes, the big playouts, going towards more of the poppy approach, much more of the accessibility, the shorter run times, but they haven't sacrificed the storytelling aspect of their songs or the sophistication and complexity of their music as well. And I think this is a great marriage between the two. So, I love this album with my whole heart. How can I not? It's a flawed album for sure, but it's definitely one that deserves to be listened to. And if you haven't listened to it in a while, put it on, give it a spin. Maybe you'll get something new out of it. I hope you do. And that's about it for Genesis's And Then There Were Three. What do you guys think about this album? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.